Yeah, first of all, thank you for organizing this conference, and I'm very glad to be here today and tomorrow and to contribute with my perspective on artistic practices in dealing with photographic collections. But first of all, I think I will present my favorite object from a very private photographic collection, as you can see. I came across this photo, I think it was 4 years ago, flipping through a photo album of my grandfather. And by now, I do not really know what this photo really depicts, and yeah, what his eyes have seen on this day, on the 2nd of June in 1952. But in the following, the photograph has raised a lot of questions on the nature of photography to me. Thank you. So now I will start to give a brief glimpse into my research. Collections of various kinds have always been important points of reference for artists, whether as a source of inspiration or as a repository of material for image references. This is especially true for photographic collections, which since the late 19th century have provided numerous painters with templates to study nature, but also became explicit sources of images. Throughout the 20th century, the appropriation of photographs and the handling thereof diversified. The individual photographic image itself became artistic material, not as a cutout image in service of collage, for instance, but as a photograph with intrinsic value. A prime example of this is the photo book Evidence, published by Mike Mendel and Larry Sultan in 1977. The book presents over 50 black and white photographs, each sequenced page per page and without any comment. Before, Mendel and Sultan had sifted through photographs in more than 100 image archives, including those from police authorities and NASA. The systematic way in which they proceeded and appropriated photographs from the archives was unprecedented in that time. Evidence became groundbreaking for a subsequent artistic practice of appropriating photographic images in archives and collections. Since then, numerous artists have visited image archives and collections, not only critically reflecting on the nature of photography, but often also on the institutions themselves. They have discussed the practices and mechanisms underlying the institutions, which mostly remain hidden. The artist Arvid Messmer is well known for his work with image archives, in which he casts a gaze on previously unseen or less noticed images and tells different stories. The focus of the installation RAF, No Evidence, is the leftist terrorist movement Red Army Faction and the events surrounding the German autumn of 1977. For this, Messmer collected image material from several archives, whereas he presents extensive sequences of photos in the form of large format folios or film strips on the wall. He has almost completely omitted the prominent images that dominate the image reporting. While in the media, photos of the bloody acts of violence caused by the RAF have been published, Messmer refrains from showing these photos. Instead, they are blanked out with a brief description of the image content, as you can see here. In his installation, Messmer exercises another storytelling, one that is opposed to the one-dimensional media reporting and shows up a complex visual world, which also considers photos from the group's private environment. While Arvid Messmer has approached the institution, this was not the case for the work by Yasmin Eid Sabak. The artist was invited to deal with the inventory of the historical photo archive of the Rautenstrauch Jost Museum in Cologne, which includes numerous photos from colonial contexts. Instead of showing photographs from the inventory, Aiza Bak and a group of activists and artists with whom she collaborated decided to exhibit the transport crates in which the photographs had been stored for years. The implicit and explicit depictions of violence in the images should not be reproduced. Rather, the exhibition featured different perspectives on the photos. The voice of activists, ethnologists, and conservators, among others, could be heard from boxes inside the crates. The question of whether and how photographs from violent contexts can still be shown is one that primarily concerns ethnographic museums. Aiza Bak has addressed these questions and has come to a clear answer. The photographs should not only no longer be shown, the transport crates can also be read as an appeal for the return of the photographs. When artists turn to photographic collections, gaps and voids are shown in different ways. This does not always mean that previously overlooked, unnoticed photographs are recovered and exhibited. It can also mean making unheard voices and perspectives audible through language. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. It's just the next slide.
Hi everyone, super nice to be here, and thank you so much for making this panel English, because it's the only way to works for me. And I was kind of expecting this talk to be a bit more like conversational, so I actually prepared this a bit in a more like informal way. But I think, yeah, okay, so first is my favorite item. So because I didn't visit this museum before, so I was interested in what is in the collections, and Felix González Torres is one of my favorite artists of mankind. And so I find that this is in your collections, if I'm not mistaken, and it's like it was made, if I'm not mistaken, for the billboards. So the artist very consciously chose something which is not what you usually find in the billboard, like without any informations, and it's like just like footsteps of the sands, and I think I found a quote from the artist, and which I think can be relevant to our ideas of what is like artist intervention. And I think at some moment González Torres wrote about the footprints, and it says, it leaves a mark, it leaves a statement that you were here, that perhaps it is possible to have a different view of life, end quote. So I was just thinking, like, this kind of very ephemeral chases of life, for me, it's a bit of like kind of this, like how artists do the intervention in the institutional spaces, because it's always with a certain time, and you do this exhibition and you do this performance, and then you laugh. So what is left? But I think I'm kind of hoping, like, if it provides a kind of different view of the life, a view of museums, and view of photography, then there's some potential in it. So my overall research is focusing on queer and non-binaries, as already been introduced, artists' intervention in the museums, and I'm very interested in on how queer and transgender artists can kind of challenges or disrupt certain norms or certain representations in the museums. So I, on the left, I put one of my important reference is Jennifer Tibus's Sex Museums, which argues like every museum is basically a sex museum, even though you don't see sex in the museums. They are still making some statement about sex, right? So I also on the left view I picked this earlier artist intervention in the 90s by Zoe Leona's photograph, like she at the Documentar 9 in 1992, and basically what she was doing is like photocopying photos of a real woman's vagina, and then just suppose it's next to any representations, mostly with female portraits. So to do so to kind of review the unspoken male gaze in the museum, and so this is a kind of the research I am interested in. And one of the example which I have been working on, I already published papers about it, is this artist Yuki Kihara. She is a Samoan artist from the Pacific with a Japanese heritage. And this is one of the photos of her earlier like in early 2000 works, because she does a lot of research in the Western Museum and looking at how early ethnographers represent the people in the Pacific Islands. And this is kind of her own creations. It's not, I cannot find any base of this photography, but she basically addressed herself both as male and females, and the title of the photo is called A Samoan Couple. And because herself is a Fa'afafini, and in Samoan languages, it literally means biologically male, but acting in the manner of the woman. So basically, it's a very it's considered like in the Samoan traditions a gender category, but in a lot of earlier ethnographers' eyes, they could be kind of misgenders in the archive, in the photography, and she's kind of trying to reflect this status, but what I am interested in also a more recent intervention she done is to produce a TV talk show to talk about Gauguin, who has a huge influence how Western or the global world like look at the Pacific Island, and what she does is like she invite her group of Fa'afinis and other indigenous people with non-binary backgrounds, and to comment on the Gauguin's painting. And what I really like is like it's not just about the criticism of Gauguin, but also a lot of laugh and a lot of jokes. And at some points they were commenting on this painting. It's called Two Tahitian Women, and they were trying to like kind of rename it as Two Tahitian Trans Women. So this kind of like humorous, like a non-experts perspective, for me it's very interesting when we engage with the museum collection. And this is another another example I have been looked at is at the Van Abbe Museum in the Netherlands, and here you see an instance of artist intervention, which was called "Why Am I Here?" And it invites 3 transgender artists to engage with the museum collection. And by asking the question, why am I here, it's already kind of questioning why does the museum want to invite queer and trans people to look at the collection, which most of them cannot find the representation in it. But what I find very interesting and perhaps more relevant here is one of the participant artists, Jill Weiss, who were responding to one of the painting you see on the left. It's a Dutch artist who in the 1930s and who made these portraits of this person of color from Portugal, who is also a boxer, Kit Oliveira. And these paintings in the museum in some time, it was kind of very much misrepresented or very much represented with a white gaze, with a very inappropriate description in the inventory as well. But what the artist did is not just to, it's not simply just to criticize this white gaze, but also to, he found this monocular photography, as you can see in the left, just on the online auction, with him showing that Kid Oliveira, the boxer, it's a slightly kind of very different representation, and kind of juxtapose them to see what was the limitation of in the current collection and interpretation framework. And I think I will make this a start, and I hope this can be a nice beginning of our conversation.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Liang-Kai. Thank you both for presenting your research and also for giving us some wonderful examples of artistic interventions that we can discuss. I think the examples that you've chosen show very well that there is a range of different possibilities and of artistic practices with which artists who are invited to work with existing collections choose to tell a story or maybe counteract an existing story. So I was wondering, do you think there is something like a common denominator between these examples, or put differently, can we try to define the term? What is an artistic intervention? I think we have also another microphone. Sorry.
I will try. Yeah, as you already said, there's indeed a broad range, I think, of artistic practices which can be considered as interventions, like, for example, reorganizing inventories, adding objects or taking objects from inventories, creating new orders or categories, but also, of course, performances, as Liang-Kai has shown. I think what is crucial to me is that there is something which surprises, that irritates, and which creates a moment maybe in which we reflect on our perception. Yeah, maybe that's it, and you can. Sorry.
Liang-Kai, would you agree?
No, I like this idea of surprising element, because I think it can become very normalized if we already assume what artist intervention will do, right? And I think also thinking about the notion of queerness, which is something beyond the norm. It's not. It's kind of questioning what is normal, and I think it's kind of relevant with this question. And I think for me, artist intervention is it's more like a conversation, because I think with the idea of intervention, I think there's some certain expectation that it's already something, there's something wrong with it, so you need to be intervene. But I think like using different objects or not even using it, I think it's all way to open up the conversation.
So I think you've already mentioned a lot of expectations that come with an invitation to an artist to work with the collection. I was wondering, do you think that artists are expected to deliver a certain result when they work with collections? Because in the case of, for example, the Van Abbe Museum that you presented, you mentioned the question that you were wondering or researching is, why would they want to do it? What are their expectations? Is it just a means of opening up, or is it also that they expect maybe something in return, a kind of a result or a critical approach or some kind of involvement?
Yeah. That is certainly the case. I think in that program I researched, they were very conscious that from the very beginning, the reason they could have the money to invite these artists is they get the specific funding from the city government, and is specifically asking for certain gender diversity in it. And I think it's pretty important for them to questioning from the very beginning why they wanted to have a certain this kind of artist performance or intervention. What it is that they cannot do that they want the artists to do that, and what does it mean for them to be in that positions to enter an institution which they probably never didn't know, and just maybe for a couple of months, and already to propose something that is expected to be maybe radical or innovative.
And also maybe, Lena, in the case of Yasmin Aitabak, where she chose not to show or to make visible by making invisible, do you think that that is also maybe a radical step in and of itself that contradicts expectations when the artist doesn't really work with the artworks or the archival materials, but that they chose to highlight the logic of the collection instead?
Yeah, but please let me first react to Liang-Kai before I will forget, because I totally agree with you, and I also think that institutions themselves have to be very clear why they invite artists, what are their expectations, and because, yeah, as you also said, Sonja, in the short introduction, it has become a very popular practice, I would say, to invite artists nowadays by art institutions, but not also museums and also ethnology museums, sorry. And I think this happens often in a broader context because the institutions are kind of forced to reflect certain aspects, also decolonize themselves, for example. And yeah, I think this can be problematic if the institution is not aware of their objectives. So I think that's very important for them to be clear, because otherwise the expectations set by the institution, may it implicitly or explicitly, they will of course have an impact on the artists, I think. And yeah. So, but now I will come back to your question. Yeah, I think it's a very radical gesture, of course, by Yasmin Aitzabak. And as I also said in my short presentation, I think one can regard this strategy or this gesture also as an appeal for the institution to return the photographs. So it's really, she really focuses on a very sensitive point, which is, yeah, a point a lot of institutions have to discuss right now. Yeah.
And I've also been wondering, because we've mentioned a lot of strategies that can be artistic, like telling a story or contextualizing, looking at something in a critical way, but these are also curatorial strategies, or they can be curatorial strategies. What would you say artistic interventions offer that curatorial work cannot? Or why invite an artist and why not do the work yourselves as a curator?
That's a good question. Yeah, of course, the boundaries between artistic practices and curatorial practices have become fluent. But nevertheless, I think curators are much more into scientific research. They are less partial. And I think what artists really can do is to give a clear statement and to discuss certain aspects in another way. I'm not sure how to say, but it's like more, it's open, and it's not, they do not have to give a scientific result, maybe.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I like this idea, this kind of fluidity between, because not just to think. Because usually if it's like it's in-house curators who invite the artist, then artist is thinking as a kind of external guest and kind of an outsider with the institution. So I think in this case, like this, because it's this artistic intervention is in. It's part of the curatorial work, right? It's not, they are not necessarily against to each other, and I think for the curatorial side, it's very important to create, make sure the infrastructure or the environment can allow like critical things to happen, like the images I was showing, like. If you could see, like actually the pen in the earlier photograph, like the painting is like moving by the conservator, and I don't really think like a lot of museum will be open to that, and there must be a certain like a risk assessment and support, so for the artist to do that.
Maybe I can add just one point, because yeah, you said that artists are not. Like they have this external status, which is absolutely right, but I think nevertheless there is also a clear hierarchy between the institution and the artists, which we have to have in mind. And sometimes this is also maybe a dependency which is based on a monetary or financial gain. Because a lot of those practices happen within a residency, for example. I think it was also the example you showed from the Van Abbe Museum. And yeah, I think that's a point you have to have in mind when you have a look on the system and on the relationship between artists, curators, or artists and the institution.
And also you've mentioned residencies, we've talked about briefly performance, installation. These are often, not always, but often temporary in nature. So I'm wondering if you think that artistic interventions are temporary as an artistic practice. Are they merely maybe symbolic? Or do they have long-lasting effects? Or what would have to happen for them to have long-lasting effects?
I think they definitely have the potential to have a permanent impact. But I think it depends on the institution. If the institution really wants to deal with the results maybe, or the artistic practice, and to the question of the success of interventions, I think maybe one can say that an intervention is successful if it has such an impact, and this means to affect maybe the practices in the museum, but also for us as beholders of photographs, for example, that those interventions influence the way we perceive the objects, I think. So yes, I would say yes. Of course, artistic intervention can have a permanent impact, and not, even though most of the interventions are temporarily.
I think I'm trying to think about the other, because if like artist performance is considered like temporary and just like for this own time, I think we have this concept that the institution is kind of permanent, right? And the museum collection is like it should be forever remain the same, right? But that is also another myth, right? Because the museum is renovating, right? And there's a change always happen. Like you cannot keep a lot of collections. So you cannot. We have this installation with a lot of these old computers. How can you keep them for forever? And I think I totally agree with the point you make, because in my case, I realize with this why am I here trans artist residency, what they would kind of very much emphasizing on is not so much about creating a new visual, but using a lot of sound and noise, and then to kind of I think one of their critical demand is kind of to listen to their voices, but not to just look at them, like a kind of like a strange or fake figure, and I think in some way like the latest collection presentation at the Van Abbe Museum is actually taking a more like a multi-sensory approach, using sound and the touch and even smell to kind of really like diverse not just the representation but the experience of the collection
as a more embodied experience. Yeah. Thank you both, and I will hand over to Clara.